The recycled air hummed with a promise of escape, a familiar lullaby for David as he settled into the plush leather of his first-class seat. Outside the reinforced window, the sprawling lights of New York City began to blur into a glittering tapestry, a testament to the empire he had meticulously built. He adjusted the silk knot of his tie, a gesture of unconscious habit, even though he was already surrounded by the discreet luxury of a transatlantic flight. This was, as always, a routine trip, another necessary journey in the relentless pursuit of expansion, of conquering new territories in the digital realm. Yet, tucked away in the deep recesses of his usually hyper-focused mind, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of anticipation stirred. He couldn't have known then, amidst the muted clink of glassware and the hushed murmurs of fellow passengers, that this particular flight, this seemingly ordinary departure, was about to unravel 6 years of carefully constructed solitude and reshape the very foundations of his existence. An unexpected encounter, entirely unforeseen, awaited him, poised to irrevocably alter the trajectory of his meticulously planned life. Meet David, a name synonymous with innovation and immense wealth in the cutthroat world of tech. At 35, he was a self-made millionaire. His company, Nexus Dynamics, a behemoth that had revolutionized personalized AI experiences. He resided in a sprawling penthouse that commanded panoramic views of Manhattan, a monument to his relentless drive and unwavering ambition. Outwardly, David exuded an unshakable confidence, a man who had mastered every challenge, every negotiation, every strategic move. His sharp suits and even sharper intellect were his armor, shielding a part of him that remained perpetually guarded. Yet beneath the polished veneer of success, a quiet undercurrent of unspoken regret often rippled through his thoughts. In the quiet solitude of his penthouse, or during the long stretches of jet lag, his mind would sometimes drift back, unbidden, to a relationship from his early 20s, a connection that had burned with an intensity he hadn't experienced since. It was a ghost in the machine of his highly efficient life, a gentle ache that resurfaced in moments of unexpected quiet. He often wondered about her, a fleeting thought, quickly compartmentalized, but never entirely erased. He had just stowed his designer carry-on in the overhead compartment, his fingers still lingering on the smooth, cool surface of his laptop, when a subtle shift in the boarding flow caught his attention. The stream of passengers, usually a faceless procession, suddenly became distinct. He glanced up, his gaze sweeping across the aisle, his mind already calculating the quickest route to a pre-flight espresso. That's when it happened. His breath hitched, a small, involuntary gasp that no one else seemed to notice amidst the din. His carefully constructed composure threatened to shatter. Standing just a few feet away, navigating the narrow aisle with a quiet grace he remembered so vividly, was a familiar face. A face he hadn't seen in 6 years. A face that belonged to a past he thought he had successfully buried beneath layers of achievements and financial triumphs. It was Emily. The recognition hit him like a physical blow, a sudden jolt that sent a tremor through his entire being. Her dark hair, now slightly longer than he remembered, still framed her striking features with an effortless elegance. Her eyes, those beautiful, intelligent eyes, were averted momentarily as she spoke softly to a flight attendant. Time seemed to warp, the hushed ambiance of the cabin amplifying the frantic thumping of his own heart. 6 years. 6 long, silent years had evaporated in an instant, replaced by a torrent of unspoken tension and a barrage of questions that immediately began to claw at the edges of his meticulously ordered mind. What was she doing here? Where was she going? Had she changed? Had he changed enough for her not to notice him? The air around him suddenly felt charged, thick with the weight of their shared history and the bewildering uncertainty of their present. He watched her for another beat, silently, a knot forming in his stomach, a mixture of dread and an undeniable, curious pull. He couldn't tear his eyes away, not even as she slowly turned, her gaze sweeping the cabin, moving closer to his row. The moment of truth, it seemed, was drawing nigh. Before we dive deeper into David's past and this fateful encounter, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories. You won't want to miss what happens next. The initial jolt of recognition continued to reverberate through David, an almost physical shockwave that had him momentarily rooted to his seat, his polished exterior cracking under the weight of an unexpected past. His mind, usually a finely tuned machine processing intricate business strategies, now flitted uncontrollably between disbelief and a potent surge of emotion. He watched Emily from across the first-class cabin, a discreet observer hidden behind the facade of a tired executive adjusting his tie. 6 years. 6 long, relentless years since he'd last seen her, since her image had burned itself into his memory as a constant ache, a phantom limb of his younger, less guarded self. He studied her, an involuntary inventory of changes and constants. Her hair, still that rich, warm auburn, cascaded slightly differently around her shoulders, perhaps a little longer, or styled with a more mature grace. There was a delicate tiredness etched subtly around her eyes, an almost imperceptible hint of sleepless nights or weighty responsibilities, yet it was offset by a radiance, a certain soft glow that hadn't been there before. It was an aura of quiet strength, of life lived beyond the bubble of their shared history. He wondered what battles she had fought, what triumphs she had celebrated, what mundane routines now filled her days. The polished fingernails he remembered were gone, replaced by a practical, unadorned look that spoke of hands that worked, that nurtured. His gaze lingered on her, trying to decipher the story her presence now told, a narrative he was suddenly desperate to understand. The hum of the airplane engines, usually a comforting backdrop to his thoughts, became a monotonous drone, highlighting the frantic rhythm of his own heartbeat. Emily, his Emily, was here, a mere aisle away, and the claustrophobic intimacy of the cabin amplified the burgeoning tension between them, unseen by anyone else but acutely felt by him. It was a pressure cooker of unresolved feelings and unasked questions. The primary obstacle wasn't just Emily herself, but the ghost of their past, a specter that haunted the space between them. Their breakup had been brutal, a slow, agonizing severing of a bond that had once felt unbreakable. David had been consumed by his ambition, a ravenous hunger for success that had left little room for anything else. He'd pushed her away, convinced that his relentless pursuit of a tech empire was paramount, that love could wait. He remembered the arguments, the desperate pleas in her eyes, the way their conversations had devolved into bitter recriminations, his focus on the future eclipsing their vibrant present. Guilt, a companion he rarely acknowledged, stirred within him now, cold and sharp. He had been so blind, so self-absorbed. He remembered the precise moment his insatiable drive had truly alienated her. A missed anniversary dinner for a last-minute investor meeting, a dismissive tone when she'd expressed her fears about his increasing distance. The final argument, a furious explosion of words in his minimalist apartment, still echoed in the quiet corners of his memory. He'd wanted to apologize then, to beg her to stay, but his pride, a stubborn, unyielding beast, had silenced him. He had watched her walk out, her back stiff with hurt, and told himself it was for the best, that success required sacrifice. Now, seeing her again, he knew he had sacrificed too much. A strong urge to approach her, to break the silence and the years of unspoken regret, warred with a paralyzing fear. What would he say? "Emily, it's David. Remember me, the idiot who let you go?" His mind raced through 1,000 different scenarios, each more awkward and painful than the last. He imagined her reaction. A cold stare, a polite but distant nod, perhaps even a flash of anger. He didn't deserve her forgiveness, he knew that. But he craved understanding, a shred of closure, a chance to explain the tormented years that followed, the hollowness that even immense wealth couldn't fill. He relived snippets of their intense, passionate relationship, the way her laugh could light up a room, the comfort of her hand in his, the effortless understanding they had shared. She had been his anchor, his confidant, the one person who saw past the ambitious facade to the vulnerable man beneath. Now, that man felt exposed, unmasked by her sudden reappearance. The implications of speaking to her now weighed heavily. He was no longer the struggling startup founder. He was a recognizable figure in the tech world. Any interaction would be scrutinized, perhaps even misunderstood. More importantly, he didn't want to cause her pain, to dredge up old wounds. Yet, the possibility of simply letting her pass through his life again, without acknowledging her, felt like an insurmountable failure. It felt like a betrayal of the past they had shared, a capitulation to the cowardice that had driven him away in the first place. He observed her subtle movements, the way she adjusted her small carry-on, the serene tilt of her head as she glanced out the window. There was an air of self-possession about her, a quiet confidence that stirred a fresh wave of admiration and regret within him. She had moved on, built a life, healed from the wreckage he had left behind. Could he disrupt that peace, even for a moment? The question hung heavy in the air, a sword of Damocles suspended over his meticulously ordered life. The desire for connection, for a word, a glance, anything to bridge the chasm of 6 years, became an almost unbearable ache. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this flight was no longer just a routine business trip. It was a journey into his own unresolved past, and Emily was its unexpected, beautiful, and profoundly unsettling guide. The cabin lights flickered, a soft hum filling the air as the massive aircraft began its ascent. David, still reeling from the unexpected sight of Emily, found his gaze involuntarily drawn back to her. She was across the aisle, 3 rows ahead, lost in what appeared to be the quiet contemplation of the world outside her window, or perhaps simply trying to avoid eye contact. He watched as her shoulders slightly relaxed, a subtle shift in her posture indicating a degree of resignation to the shared space. He felt a strange mixture of relief and regret bloom in his chest. Relief that she hadn't immediately noticed his presence, but regret that he hadn't managed to compose himself enough to offer a casual, confident greeting, the kind he practiced for business encounters. Suddenly, as if sensing his persistent stare, Emily turned her head, her eyes, the same piercing blue he remembered, locking onto his. A jolt, sharp and electric, passed through David. Time seemed to warp, the familiar cabin fading into a distant blur. Her expression was unreadable at first, a flicker of surprise, then perhaps a shadow of recognition, and finally, a faint, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent acknowledgement, a fragile bridge built over 6 years of silence. David mirrored her gesture, a weak, almost sheepish smile touching his lips. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat, a thick knot of emotion preventing their escape. The silence stretched, heavy and profound, before Emily finally, slowly, turned her gaze back towards her window, leaving David suspended in a void of unanswered questions and unexpressed sentiments. The flight progressed, a surreal journey through the clouds. David tried to distract himself, opening his laptop, but the glowing screen held no interest. Every rustle from Emily's direction, every soft sigh, sent a ripple through his carefully constructed composure. He couldn't shake the sensation of being back in their old apartment, sharing a quiet moment, the world outside a distant hum. This was different, though. This was a public space, a metal tube hurtling through the sky, and the woman beside him was no longer his. It was during one of these restless shifts in his seat, as he leaned forward to adjust the air vent above, that he caught it. A subtle movement in the seat next to Emily, previously obscured by the angle. His breath hitched, nestled securely in the space where a second passenger would normally sit was a baby carrier. A small, intricately patterned blanket partially covered its contents, but a tiny hand, no bigger than his thumb, lay exposed near the edge, its pinkness stark against the white fabric. A gasp, almost inaudible, escaped his lips. His eyes darted to Emily. She was still looking out the window, her profile serene, oblivious to his discovery. The sight of the carrier, of that minuscule, innocent hand, sent a shockwave through David's carefully compartmentalized world. He felt a sudden coldness seep into his veins, then a flush of heat. A baby. Emily had a baby. The timeline of their separation, the 6 agonizing years, flashed before his eyes, each moment scrutinized, reevaluated in the fierce, blinding light of this new reality. His thoughts raced, a chaotic jumble of questions. When? How? Who? The who was the most insistent, a sharp, unwelcome stab of jealousy piercing through his carefully maintained indifference. He pictured Emily with someone else, building a life, a family. It was a future he had once envisioned with her, a dream he'd sacrificed on the altar of ambition, only to find himself now, 6 years later, staring at the tangible proof of its unfulfillment. A profound internal shift began to unfurl within him. The surprise quickly morphed into a bewildering cocktail of emotions. There was a raw, aching sadness, a deep-seated regret for the path he had chosen. There was also an unidentifiable longing, a primal ache he hadn't known he possessed, stirring within his chest. The baby's presence, small and vulnerable, forced him to confront not just the physical timeline of their past relationship, but the emotional one. He saw the years he had spent chasing material success, building an empire, now juxtaposed against the quiet, profound act of creation that had clearly occurred in Emily's life. He lowered his head slightly, pretending to examine the safety card in the seat pocket, his eyes, however, still fixed on the carrier. He desperately wanted to see the baby's face, to glean some hint, some feature that might offer a clue. But the blanket remained stubbornly in place, a soft barrier protecting its precious cargo. He felt a strange tenderness, an unexpected protectiveness wash over him, immediately followed by the bitter realization that he had no claim to it, no right to these feelings. This was Emily's life now, a life he was clearly not a part of, a life that had moved on, creating something beautiful and new without him. The ache in his chest deepened, solidifying into a heavy weight. The luxurious first-class cabin, the endless amenities, his carefully curated world of success, suddenly felt hollow, almost meaningless, in the face of this sleeping infant and the silent, undeniable truth it represented. David's mind raced, a frantic kaleidoscope of memories and possibilities. He replayed the last months of their relationship, every argument, every tender moment, every lingering touch. Their breakup had been tumultuous, fueled by his relentless pursuit of career success and a catastrophic misunderstanding that had driven an insurmountable wedge between them. He remembered a period, shortly before their painful parting, when their connection had been particularly intense, a desperate clinging to each other in the face of their diverging paths. Could it be? The thought, initially a flicker, rapidly ignited into a searing flame of suspicion, sending a jolt through his entire being. He began meticulously reconstructing the timeline, calculating dates, counting backwards from what he estimated to be the baby's age. The math, horrifyingly, disturbingly, devastatingly, added up. The baby might, horrifyingly, be his. This sudden, earth-shattering realization was more than just a suspicion. It was a visceral punch to the gut. His carefully constructed facade of detached success crumbled. All the years of hard work, the millions earned, the accolades received, seemed utterly insignificant compared to the burgeoning weight of this potential truth. He remembered Emily's tears, her heartbroken whispers that he was choosing his ambition over them, over a future that could have been. He had dismissed her pleas, blind in his youthful arrogance, convinced that wealth and power would bring him ultimate fulfillment. Now, confronted with this tiny, innocent life, he understood the true cost of his choices. He saw the potential for a life he had unknowingly foregone, a family he had unknowingly abandoned. And what of Emily? He imagined her journey, a narrative far removed from his own trajectory of seamless success. He pictured her navigating the bewildering landscape of unexpected single motherhood, her fears, her triumphs, her quiet strength. He envisioned her making impossible choices, sacrificing her own dreams to nurture this new life. Had she struggled? Had she faced judgment? He felt a crushing wave of guilt for having been absent, for having been so consumed by his own world that he hadn't even considered the possibility that his actions might have had such profound, lasting consequences for her. He wondered about the circumstances that had led her to this flight, perhaps a new beginning, a fresh start, or simply the pragmatic demands of a life he knew nothing about. He imagined her own internal conflict upon seeing him, the man who had shattered her world, now sitting across the aisle, witnessing the life she had built without him. There was a quiet dignity about her, a resilience etched into the lines around her eyes that spoke volumes of battles fought and won. The confined space of the airplane, once a symbol of his luxurious solitude, now felt suffocating, amplifying the internal tumult. The question of fatherhood, of responsibility, of an entire lifetime unfolding without his knowledge, became an overwhelming, all-consuming preoccupation. He couldn't shake the image of the baby, the tiny hand, the delicate blanket. He pictured its eyes, its smile, its first steps, all moments he had irrevocably missed. The weight of 6 years of missed milestones, of unspoken goodnights, of untouched tiny fingers, pressed down on him with an almost unbearable force. Each passing minute on the flight felt like an eternity, dragging him through a psychological landscape he had never anticipated. He stole another glance at the carrier, a desperate attempt to find some confirmation, some denial, anything that would either solidify or shatter this terrifying, exhilarating thought. Was there a striking resemblance? A curve of the cheek, a hint of hair color? The blanket remained a tantalizing, frustrating barrier. He imagined the baby stirring, its small cries filling the cabin, forcing an interaction, a revelation. But the infant remained peacefully asleep, a silent testament to a life lived, a story untold, a secret held close by Emily. David felt a desperate urge to reach out, to speak to her, to demand answers, yet a paralyzing fear held him captive. What if he was wrong? What if the timeline was a coincidence? What if this was someone else's child entirely, and his intrusive thoughts were merely the product of a deeply buried regret? But the feeling, the knot in his stomach, the persistent ache in his chest, told him otherwise. This was more than just coincidence. This was fate, a cruel, beautiful twisting of their past, unfolding before him at 30,000 feet. The future, which had once seemed so clearly mapped out, so meticulously planned, now stretched before him as an uncharted territory, utterly transformed by the silent presence of a sleeping infant. The subtle shift in the cabin's ambient hum, signaling their ascent to cruising altitude, did little to settle the tumultuous storm raging within David. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that he could not let this moment pass. 6 years of silence, a chasm of unspoken words and unresolved feelings, now magnified by the tiny, hidden occupant of the baby carrier, demanded reconciliation of some kind. He needed answers, not just for Emily, but for himself. The questions gnawed at him, sharp and relentless, each one a tiny barb pulling at the threads of his carefully constructed reality. He straightened in his seat, taking a deliberate breath, the stale cabin air doing little to calm his racing heart. He turned slowly, a rehearsed casualness he didn't feel, towards Emily. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, his filled with an intensity he couldn't mask, hers with a flicker of recognition, perhaps even apprehension, before she averted them, ostensibly to adjust the blanket over the carrier. This was it. The moment of truth, or at least the beginning of its pursuit. "Emily," he began, his voice surprisingly steady, though it felt like a foreign sound in his own ears. "It's been a long time. How have you been?" He aimed for polite, detached curiosity, but the underlying tremor of his emotions was undeniable, even to himself. He watched her closely, every subtle shift in her expression, every movement of her hands, searching for a clue, any hint that might betray the secrets she held. She turned back to him, a faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaping her lips. "David." "Yes, it has." Her voice was soft, a little weary, but still held the familiar melodious quality he remembered. I'm well, thank you. And you? Still conquering the world, I presume?" There was a hint of sarcasm in her tone, a ghost of their old dynamic, which oddly offered him a tiny glimmer of hope. It meant she remembered, and perhaps still felt something, however veiled. "Something like that," he replied, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. He paused, letting the silence hang between them, heavy with unspoken history. He had to tread carefully, like navigating a minefield. He couldn't just blurt out his suspicions. Life has certainly evolved. A lot has changed. He gestured vaguely, hoping she would pick up on the unspoken invitation to elaborate, to share. Emily offered a non-committal hum, her gaze drifting back to the carrier. David's eyes followed hers, a magnetic pull he couldn't resist. He saw the gentle curve of her back as she leaned slightly towards it, a protective instinct he recognized instantly. It was a mother's stance. "Yes," she said, her voice softer now, tinged with an undeniable warmth. "Life certainly does evolve, sometimes in ways we never anticipate." Bingo. A small opening. He seized it. "Indeed, I can only imagine. It seems you've been quite busy." He nodded towards the carrier, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He felt like an interrogator, but one whose life depended on the answer. She looked at him then, her eyes widening slightly, a fleeting spark of surprise in their depths. It was clear she hadn't expected him to notice, or perhaps to comment. A small, almost shy smile touched her lips. "Yes," she confirmed, her voice now filled with a quiet pride. "Very busy. This is my daughter." Daughter. The word echoed in his mind, resonating with a strange mix of wonder and dread. He hadn't dared to assume gender, but now that he knew, it added another layer to his mental calculations. "She's beautiful, I'm sure," David managed, his throat suddenly tight. "Congratulations, Emily. This is quite a surprise." He wanted to ask her name, her age, everything, but held back, forcing himself to maintain a measured pace. He needed her to volunteer information, not to feel cornered. "Thank you," she said, and he noticed a slight softening in her posture. She's my whole world." Her hand instinctively reached out, gently patting the blanket. "She's a very good traveler, thankfully. Sleeps through most of it." "That's fortunate," David said, trying to infuse casualness into his tone. "How old is she, if you don't mind me asking?" "She looks tiny." He held his breath, every nerve ending alert, awaiting her response. This was the crucial detail, the piece that would either confirm his growing conviction or shatter it entirely. He tried to recall their last conversation, the specific date of their bitter farewell. It felt like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Emily hesitated for a beat, her gaze flicking between him and the carrier. He saw a brief internal debate play out on her face, a moment where she weighed her answer, considering what to reveal and what to keep private. Then she seemed to come to a decision, a slight shrug of her shoulders, as if resigning herself to a certain level of disclosure. "She just turned 5 months last week," she stated, her voice calm, devoid of any emotional inflection that might give away more than she intended. 5 months. The words hit David with the force of a physical blow. 5 months. He rapidly did the math in his head, a frantic calculation of conception, gestation. Their breakup had been exactly 6 years ago, but their final passionate night together, the one filled with desperate goodbyes and lingering promises, had occurred just before his ambitious move, precisely 9 months and 5 months before this very moment. A chill traced its way down his spine, a cold, undeniable certainty. The dates aligned with terrifying precision. His suspicion, initially a vague, unsettling notion, solidified into an undeniable, terrifying truth. The baby, his beautiful, tiny daughter, was undeniably his. The world tilted on its axis, and the hum of the aircraft faded into a distant roar as reality crashed down upon him. The conversation had circled around their past, treading carefully over memories both fond and painful. Yet David's mind remained fixed on the one glaring, silent presence between them: the baby. Emily had spoken of her work, a non-profit focused on early childhood education, and her move to the West Coast, her voice retaining that familiar, melodic quality that still resonated deep within him. He had shared vague details of his tech empire, carefully omitting the loneliness that often accompanied his soaring success. Each shared glance, each hesitant smile, felt like a step across a tightrope strung high above an abyss of 6 lost years. He knew he had to ask, and the growing ache in his chest, a desperate mixture of fear and profound hope, propelled him forward. He leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, laden with an emotion he could no longer suppress. "Emily," he began, the name feeling both foreign and intimately familiar on his tongue. We need to talk about something." His gaze, finally, irrevocably, locked onto the baby carrier, then back to her eyes, searching for a sign, any indication of what her reaction might be. "The baby," he continued, his throat tight. I have to ask, is that my child?" The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken history, heavy with the weight of consequence. The hum of the airplane's engines seemed to fade, replaced by the frantic beating of his own heart. This was it. The moment of truth, the question that had tormented him since he first saw that tiny hand. Emily's serene composure fractured, her head tilted downwards, her auburn hair falling forward, momentarily obscuring her face. A long, agonizing silence stretched between them, punctuated only by his ragged breaths. He watched her hands, clasping and unclasping in her lap, a nervous habit he remembered from their youth. Finally, she slowly lifted her head, her eyes, usually so bright, now clouded with a complex mix of regret, weariness, and a flicker of something akin to pain. "David," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the cabin noise. I knew this day might come." Another pause, and he braced himself for either devastating confirmation or crushing denial. "Yes," she finally said, meeting his gaze, her voice stronger now, though still tinged with sorrow. "Yes, David, she's yours, our daughter." The world reeled. A profound, almost physical jolt went through him, knocking the air from his lungs. It was an affirmation, a confession, that simultaneously shattered and rebuilt his entire reality. His daughter. Our daughter. The words echoed in the chambers of his mind, reverberating with a power he hadn't known existed. Emily then began to explain, her words tumbling out, laced with a vulnerability he hadn't witnessed in years. "When I found out," she started, her gaze drifting back to the sleeping infant. "Shortly after we broke up, I was terrified. You were so driven, so consumed by your ambition. I saw how much your career meant to you, how you were building this incredible future for yourself. I thought I would be a burden, a distraction." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I was young, scared, and honestly a little broken from everything. I convinced myself that telling you would derail your dreams, that you wouldn't want the responsibility. I believed it was for the best, for you and for her, to give you the space you needed to achieve everything you'd always planned." Her voice softened, tinged with a deep maternal love. "I wanted to protect you both, in my own misguided way. I moved, changed my number, thinking I was doing the right thing. It was incredibly difficult, the hardest decision I've ever made, but I felt I had to do it alone." She didn't make excuses, but rather offered a raw, honest account of her fear and her perception of him at that time, a perception he now realized was heartbreakingly accurate in its assessment of his all-consuming ambition. David listened, utterly transfixed, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within him. Shock, yes, but beneath it, a crushing wave of regret, so potent it felt like a physical blow. Regret for his past self, for the man he was, for the dreams he'd prioritized above all else. But then, almost miraculously, a profound, overwhelming surge of joy erupted, bright and fierce, cutting through the darkness. He had a daughter, a child, a family he never knew he had. The reality of it was almost too much to bear. His eyes welled up, a burning sensation behind them, tears he hadn't shed in years threatening to spill over. He saw his life flash before him, the endless meetings, the late nights, the relentless pursuit of more, always more. And for what? For this hollow success that now paled in comparison to the miracle sleeping soundly inches away from him. The meticulously built walls around his heart crumbled, revealing a cavernous emptiness he hadn't fully acknowledged until this precise moment. A sense of responsibility, immense and immediate, settled over him, not as a burden, but as a newfound purpose. His entire perspective on life, on success, on what truly mattered, twisted and reshaped itself in an instant, forever altered by Emily's quiet, devastating confession. He had a child. His child. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, rewriting the very narrative of his existence. His hand trembled slightly as he reached out, a quiet, almost reverent gesture towards the sleeping infant. Emily watched him, a vulnerability he hadn't seen in her eyes for a decade, reflecting his own raw emotions. He gently touched the baby's cheek, the skin impossibly soft, warm beneath his fingertips. A wave of indescribable tenderness washed over him, a feeling so potent it threatened to buckle his knees. This was his child, his daughter, a tiny miracle he had unknowingly been robbed of for 6 years. Her small chest rose and fell with the rhythmic breath of innocent sleep, her little hand curled into a perfect miniature fist. In that moment, the sterile, impersonal cabin of the first-class airplane seat melted away, replaced by the intimate cocoon of this nascent, overwhelming connection. He felt an immediate, fierce protectiveness surge through him, an instinct so primal it bypassed all logic and reason. Every ambition, every deal closed, every decimal point in his bank account suddenly seemed utterly meaningless in the face of this tiny, vulnerable being. The world outside, the bustling city life he'd created, the empire he'd painstakingly built, all faded into an indistinct hum. There was only this child, this daughter, a direct, undeniable extension of himself and the woman he had once loved so fiercely. He felt a profound sense of loss for the years he'd missed, for the first smiles, the first steps, the first words. A sharp pang of grief twisted in his gut, a realization that these precious moments were gone forever, irrevocably lost to his blind ambition and Emily's quiet desperation. Then, with an almost imperceptible shift, the baby stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. 2 deep, hazel eyes, so strikingly similar to his own, gazed up at him with an innocent curiosity that pierced him to his very core. A tiny, unself-conscious gurgle escaped her lips, and a tentative smile bloomed on her face. It was the most beautiful sound, the most perfect sight he had ever witnessed. This wasn't just a baby. This was his baby, an undeniable piece of his soul made manifest. The connection was instantaneous, electric, forging a bond that felt ancient and unbreakable, a love more profound than anything he had ever known. He looked at Emily, his eyes brimming with unshed tears, a silent apology, a silent promise. She offered him a small, watery smile, tears tracing paths down her own cheeks. In that shared glance, years of unspoken pain, regret, and misunderstanding dissolved, replaced by a common thread of awe and love for the child nestled between them. The emotional peak of their lives, the true climax of 6 years of separate existences, unfolded right there, suspended thousands of feet above the earth. David cradled his daughter more securely, his hand finding the soft curve of her head. He whispered her name, Lily, a name Emily had revealed to him just moments before, a name that now resonated with an unexpected sweetness. Lily giggled, a sound that resonated deep within his chest, a melody he knew he would cherish for the rest of his life. In that instant, his entire definition of success and happiness shattered and reformed. The relentless pursuit of wealth, the endless working hours, the isolation of his penthouse life. It all felt utterly empty, a hollow victory compared to the warmth of his daughter's small hand clutching his finger. His ambition, which had once been his driving force, The very thing that had pushed Emily away and prevented him from knowing his child now felt like a cruel master that had stolen his joy. He understood then, with a crystal clarity that was both heartbreaking and liberating, the true meaning of what he had lost. He hadn't just lost a relationship with Emily. He had lost 6 years of fatherhood, 6 years of watching his daughter grow, 6 years of pure, unconditional love. He saw now that his carefully constructed empire was built on a foundation of sand, lacking the essential element of human connection. The profound connection he felt with Lily was the missing piece, the invaluable treasure he had unwittingly thrown away. A fierce resolve ignited within him, burning away the last vestiges of his old self. He wasn't just a millionaire CEO, he was a father who had missed out, but a father who was here now, and who would fight to make up for every lost moment. His past mistakes with Emily, his inability to see beyond his own career goals, loomed large, but so did the fierce desire to rectify them. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that there were years of hurt and distrust to overcome, but he felt an unshakable certainty. He looked at Emily, his voice thick with emotion. "Emily," he began, his grip on Lily still firm but gentle. "I know I can't undo the past. I know I messed up horribly. But please, let me be a part of her life. Let me be a father to Lily. And let me make things right with both of you. I want to build something real, something meaningful, a true family. I want to offer my support. Whatever you need, however you need it. I don't want to miss another second." His words were not just an offer, but a solemn vow, echoing through the quiet cabin, a commitment to a new path, a new future, forged in the crucible of regret and illuminated by the innocent gaze of his daughter. The life he had known was irrevocably over, and a new, infinitely more precious one had just begun. As the plane began its descent, the soft hum of the engines a lullaby to the still sleeping child, David and Emily found themselves in a quiet yet charged conversation that stretched beyond the confines of their seats and into the future. The initial shock had given way to a profound sense of clarity for David, a deep understanding of the monumental changes that had just swept through his life. He reached across the aisle, his hand gently covering hers where it rested on the armrest, a gesture of apology and promise all rolled into one. His voice, though still tinged with emotion, was steady, resolute. "Emily," he began, his eyes fixed on hers, reflecting a sincerity she hadn't seen in him for years. "I am so incredibly sorry. For everything. For being so blind, so self-absorbed, so utterly consumed by my own ambition that I couldn't see what was truly important. I let a good thing go, a beautiful thing, and I let you go, thinking that work was all that mattered. I have lived with a silent regret for years, a void I couldn't name, and now I know what it was." He paused, gathering his thoughts, allowing the weight of his words to settle between them. "Please know that in this moment, everything has changed for me. My priorities, my entire perspective. This little girl, our daughter, she is everything. And I want to be a part of her life, a real part. And I want to be a part of yours too, if you'll let me." Emily listened, her gaze softening, a flicker of hope beginning to pierce through the years of guarded resilience. She saw the genuine pain in his eyes, but also a newfound determination that was profoundly different from the ruthless drive she remembered. His apology wasn't just words. It was an admission of responsibility, a plea for redemption that resonated deep within her. The vulnerability he displayed was disarming, melting away some of the bitterness she had unknowingly held on to. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that years of unspoken history and independent lives couldn't simply be erased, but his sincerity was a powerful balm. "David," she replied, her voice a little shaky. It's a lot to take in. I've been doing this alone for so long, protecting her, protecting myself. I thought I had come to terms with it, with you not being a part of our lives. But seeing her with you." She gestured vaguely towards the baby, a wistful smile gracing her lips. "It changes things. I'm not saying it will be simple, or that we can just pick up where we left off. So much has happened, so much time has passed. But," and here she met his gaze fully, "I believe you. I see that you've changed, or at least, that this moment has changed you. And she deserves to know her father. We both deserve a chance to figure this out." A wave of immense relief washed over David, so potent it almost brought fresh tears to his eyes. He squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you, Emily. Thank you for even considering it. I promise you, I will do everything in my power to make it right, to be the father she deserves and to be the man you deserve." He didn't know what their future held, not yet, but the path ahead, once shrouded in the lonely pursuit of material success, now sparkled with the promise of something infinitely more valuable. He felt a profound sense of peace, a completeness he had never experienced even at the height of his business triumphs. As the plane touched down with a gentle bump, signaling their arrival, David carefully unbuckled his seatbelt. He helped Emily with her carry-on, his movements imbued with a new tenderness, a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. The bustling energy of the cabin as passengers began to disembark felt distant, their world momentarily confined to their small, powerful circle. Emily carefully lifted their daughter from the carrier, the baby stirring slightly, opening her eyes, bright and curious. David met those eyes and felt an undeniable connection, an unconditional love that dwarfed any ambition he had ever chased. Stepping off the plane, David's hand instinctively found Emily's, a silent affirmation of their tentative new beginning. The sterile airport terminal, usually a blur of transient faces and hurried steps, now felt like the threshold of a new chapter. He looked at Emily, then at their daughter cradled securely in her arms, a sense of overwhelming gratitude washing over him. The wealth he had accumulated, the luxury penthouse, the high-flying lifestyle, it all seemed a pale imitation of the true richness he now held in his grasp. The love and connection he had almost lost, the family he had unknowingly created, was the real treasure. He understood now that true success wasn't measured in revenue or stock options, but in the warmth of a shared glance, the unspoken promise of a future, and the tiny, innocent hand of a child who had unknowingly guided him home. They walked together, side by side, not as strangers, nor as former lovers reunited by chance, but as a family, stepping into an unknown future, complex and challenging, yet undeniably hopeful. This journey, from ambition to affection, from regret to redemption, had finally led him to the only destination that truly mattered: his family.